When my son got married, I thought I had gained a daughter, but slowly, without realizing it, I lost my son instead. It didn't happen suddenly. There wasn't one single fight or one cruel word that broke everything. No, it happened quietly, like the way seasons change. You don't notice the exact moment when summer turns to autumn. You just wake up one morning and realize the warmth is gone. I remember the day of his wedding like it was yesterday. He looked so handsome in his cream-colored sherwani, nervous but smiling. I remember fixing the collar he had folded wrong and saying, "You still can't dress properly without me, hmm?" He laughed, holding my hand, and in that moment I thought nothing could ever come between us. I raised him on my own after his father passed away. Every little thing I did was for him. Every long day, every sacrifice. He used to say, "Ma, when I grow up, you'll never have to worry again. I'll take care of you." And I believed him, because back then, love was simple and promises felt eternal. But life changes after marriage. It's natural, people say. And I told myself the same thing again and again. He's married now. He needs a space. He has a new family to care for. I said it calmly, even when I sat by the window waiting for his calls that never came, even when I cooked his favorite curry and ate it alone, even when festivals passed in silence and I watched other mothers surrounded by laughter and children while my own house echoed only with memories. They say a mother's heart knows when something is slipping away. Mine did too, slowly, painfully, but I smiled through it, pretending everything was fine. Because sometimes it's easier to pretend than to admit that the person you love most in this world has quietly walked away from you. Not in anger, but in the name of love.
I still remember the sound of his little footsteps running across the house. Every morning, before school, he'd come rushing into my room shouting, "Ma, I can't find my socks," or "Ma, where's my tiffin box?" It became the music of my mornings. After his father passed away, it was just the two of us. Our home was small, but it was filled with laughter. I worked as a tailor from home, stitching clothes for the neighborhood ladies. And in between the whir of my sewing machine, I'd hear his voice, asking for snacks, telling me stories from school, asking silly questions about the world. He was my purpose. Every rupee I earned, every dream I had, it began and ended with him. When he brought home his first report card, he handed it to me like a medal, his eyes shining. "Ma, look, first in class." And I told him, "I'm proud of you, my boy, but more than your marks, I'm proud of your heart." He was a kind child, gentle, patient, the sort who'd stop to feed a stray dog, or give his lunch to a classmate who'd forgotten theirs. When people said, "You've raised a good son," I'd smile and say, "He's my blessing." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. As he grew older, our home changed, but our bond didn't. When he started college, he'd still sit by me in the evenings, telling me about his classes, his friends, his dreams. I'd make him tea the way he liked it, strong with a little extra sugar. He'd take a sip, sigh contentedly, and say, "Ma, no one in the world makes tea like you." And I'd laugh, pretending to scold him. "Of course not. They don't have a mother's love in their cup." He'd call me every day, even after moving to the city for his job. Sometimes it was just for a minute. "Ma, I'm home, I ate, don't worry." Those small calls meant the world to me. Even his silence when he was tired was comforting, because silence with your own child feels like safety, not distance.
The first time he mentioned her, his voice sounded different, lighter, brighter. "Ma, there's someone I want you to meet," he said one evening over the phone. There was a pause, a small, shy laugh. "She works with me. Her name's Ananya." Something in his tone told me this was more than friendship. I smiled, even though my heart ached a little, not with jealousy, but with the strange mix of joy and fear that comes when you realize your child is building a life beyond you. He brought her home a few weeks later. She was polite, respectful, and beautiful in a simple way. She touched my feet, called me auntie, and smiled warmly. We talked over tea. She told me about her family, her work, her love for cooking. She was everything a mother could hope for in her son's choice. And yet, deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "Everything will change now." When they got married, it was a small ceremony, just close family and friends. I wore a soft blue sari that my son picked himself. He told me, "Ma, you look beautiful." And I said, "Today, I'm the happiest mother in the world." But that night, after all the laughter and blessings, I sat alone in my room, surrounded by the sound of silence. The house felt bigger than it ever had. His room was empty, the bed neatly made, the shelf still holding his childhood trophies, his old books, and that small photo of us from his school farewell day. I touched the photo frame and smiled through tears. "He's happy," I whispered to myself. That's all I ever wanted. The first few months of his marriage were joyful. He called me often, sometimes with her on the line. They'd ask about my health, about the house. On weekends, they'd visit, bringing sweets or small gifts. She'd help me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, laughing easily.
I grew to like her, maybe even love her, because she made my son happy. We'd sit together after dinner, talking about small things, the weather, neighbors, the new show she liked on TV. I remember thinking, maybe I haven't lost him after all. But slowly, the calls began to lessen. The visits became fewer. When I asked, he'd say, "Ma, work's been busy. We'll come soon, I promise." Soon became next month. Next month became the festival. And the festival came and went without them. At first, I tried not to think too much of it. They were young, adjusting to their new life. I told myself, give them time. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The silence began to stretch. Sometimes I'd dial his number, only to hear it ring endlessly before going unanswered. Then I'd tell myself, he must be in a meeting. I'd hang up and wait for his call back, a call that never came. Still, I kept preparing his favorite dishes on Sundays, as if somehow he'd walk in any minute saying, "Ma, I was just passing by and thought I'd eat here." But the food stayed untouched. I began talking to his photo in the evenings. It became my way of coping. I'd tell him about my day, about the new neighbors, about the small repairs in the house. And every night before sleeping, I'd whisper, "Good night, my son. I love you." I never realized how loneliness doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, like a shadow following you around your house. You learn to live with it, to greet it every morning, to share your dinner table with its silence. I still remember the last time he visited before everything changed. It was around his first wedding anniversary. He came alone that day, said she wasn't feeling well. He looked tired, distracted, constantly checking his phone. We had lunch together. I asked about her, about his work. He answered politely, but briefly, as if his mind was elsewhere. Before leaving, I said, "You should visit more often." He smiled faintly. "Yes, Ma, soon." But the look in his eyes told me soon might never come. And I was right. That day, as I stood at the door watching him leave, a part of me knew I was watching not just my son walk away, but the version of him that still belonged to me. Days turned into months after that visit. I would wake up early, as always, make tea for two, then realize there was no one to share it with. It's strange how habits hold on even when the people don't. The mornings were the hardest. I'd check my phone, not for messages, but for the small green dot beside his name, just to know he was there, awake somewhere in the world. That tiny green light became my comfort, but even that began to disappear. Sometimes I'd see he was online, but no message came. I told myself he must be busy. But the truth was, a mother always knows when she's being forgotten, not out of malice, but out of the simple flow of life that carries children away. I decided to visit them one weekend. I packed a small box of his favorite sweets and some pickles I'd made for her. I called in advance, but there was no reply. Still, I thought, maybe it'll be a surprise. When I reached their apartment, I rang the bell and waited. It took a while before the door opened. It was her, Ananya. She looked surprised to see me. "Oh, Auntie, you didn't tell us you were coming." Her tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't warm either. I smiled anyway. "I just thought I'd drop by. Brought you some sweets." She hesitated before opening the door fully. "Please, come in." The house was clean, modern, but it didn't feel like my son's home. There were no family photos, no signs of his old laughter. I could tell he wasn't there. "Is he at work?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, he had some meetings. He'll be late." I tried to hide my disappointment. We had tea, but it was quiet. The warmth I once felt between us was gone. She seemed distracted, glancing at her phone, barely meeting my eyes. After a few minutes, she said softly, "You should have called before coming, Auntie. We've been really busy lately." I nodded, smiling, as if I didn't understand the hint, but I did. Before leaving, I placed the sweets on the counter and said, "These are his favorite. Please remind him to eat some." She smiled politely. "I will." As I stepped out of their door, I looked back once, hoping she'd say, "Please stay for dinner," or "He'll be home soon." But the door closed quietly behind me.
And I stood there for a long time, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the hallway. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights blink one by one. I thought about how love changes shape. When your child is little, love is loud. It's laughter, stories, small hands tugging at your sari. But when they grow, love becomes silent. It waits. It hopes. It forgives quietly. Weeks passed before he called again. When I answered, I tried to sound cheerful. "Hello, beta. I was just thinking of you." He sounded tired. "Ma, sorry, I've been so busy. Things at work are crazy." I wanted to say, "I went to see you. You weren't home." But I didn't. Mothers learn when to speak and when to stay silent. So I just said, "That's all right. Eat well. Take care of your health." He said he would and hung up quickly. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered, "He doesn't sound happy." And somehow that hurt more than being forgotten. A few months later, they came to visit. It was the first time in almost a year. I cleaned the whole house, cooked all his favorite dishes, and wore the sari he once said made me look like the prettiest ma in the world.
When they arrived, I noticed something right away. He looked thinner, quieter. She seemed distant, polite, but cold. During lunch, I tried to bring up old memories. "Remember the time you burned your first roti?" I laughed. He smiled faintly, but she looked uncomfortable. After lunch, while clearing the table, I overheard her whisper sharply, You never told me she'd made so much food. We can't keep eating like this every time we visit." Her tone wasn't meant for me, but I heard it anyway. I stood still for a moment, holding a plate, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. Then I smiled and said, "I packed some for you to take home. You can eat it later." She looked at me surprised and murmured, "Thanks, Auntie." That night after they left, I sat alone at the dining table and touched the empty chairs. They still felt warm, as if his presence lingered there, refusing to fade away. From then on, things changed. He stopped calling altogether. When I called, she would answer. Her tone was polite but brief. "He's busy, Auntie. I'll tell him you called." Sometimes she didn't answer at all. Sometimes she'd say he was traveling. Once she even said, "It's not a good time to talk. He's resting." I stopped calling after that, not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to be a burden.
One evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Gupta, came over. She said she'd seen them at the mall, shopping, laughing, holding hands. She said, "You must be so proud. They look so happy together." I smiled politely, but inside something tightened. I was happy they were happy, but I couldn't help thinking, why didn't he tell me? Why did I have to hear about his life from someone else? The festival came again that year. I decorated the house, cooked his favorite sweets, and waited all day. By evening, I knew they wouldn't come. Still, I lit a small lamp and placed it by his photo. I whispered, "Wherever you are, may your home be filled with light." When I blew out the candle that night, I realized the house had become silent. Not just quiet, but hollow. A silence that doesn't wait for footsteps anymore. Days passed, and I began to live for small things. The morning sun on my plants, the laughter of neighborhood children, the stray cat that visited my porch for milk. They became my new family, filling the spaces where my son's voice used to be. But some nights, when the world was asleep, I'd wake up suddenly, certain that I'd heard his voice calling, "Ma!" I'd rush to the door and find nothing but the quiet wind outside.
That was when I began to write him letters I never sent. I'd pour my heart into them, telling him everything I couldn't say over the phone. I'd write, "Don't worry about me, I'm fine. I made your favorite dish today. I still pray for you every night." And once, just once, I wrote, "I miss the way you used to call me Ma, not Auntie." Then I'd fold each letter carefully and place it inside a box beneath his photo. A box full of words he'd never read, but I hoped somehow he'd feel them anyway. It happened one monsoon evening. The rain had been falling since morning, heavy, steady, and endless. I was sitting by the window, holding a cup of tea, watching droplets race each other down the glass. The world outside felt blurred, and so did the thoughts in my mind. I thought of him again, my son, and wondered if he'd eaten, if he was sleeping well, if he ever thought of me when it rained. Just then, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped. It had been weeks since I'd heard from him. But when I checked, it wasn't his name on the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hello, this is Ananya." I froze for a second before opening the message fully. It said, "Ma, he's been admitted to the hospital. Nothing too serious, just observation. I thought you should know." My heart dropped. I didn't even think. I grabbed my shawl, locked the door behind me, and rushed into the rain.
I didn't care that it was dark, that the roads were slippery, or that I hadn't eaten all day. A mother doesn't think, she just goes. When I reached the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and cold air hit me. I walked quickly through the corridors, asking at the desk, trembling, "My son, Rohan Mehta, where is he?" They directed me to a ward. When I entered, I saw him lying on the bed, asleep. He looked pale, weaker than I had ever seen him. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. I walked closer, quietly, not wanting to wake him. I placed my hand gently on his arm. It was warm. He stirred slightly, opening his eyes halfway. "Ma?" he whispered, barely audible. I smiled through tears that I didn't even know had fallen. "I'm here, Beta. I'm here." He tried to smile, but coughed instead. The nurse came in and said softly, "He'll be fine. Just stress and exhaustion. He needs rest." I nodded gratefully. But inside, guilt stabbed me like a knife. He had looked so tired the last time I saw him. Maybe if I'd been closer, if I'd called more, if I'd insisted on visiting, maybe I could have known sooner.
Ananya arrived a little later. Her clothes were damp from the rain, her eyes red from crying. She looked at me, surprised, but not angry. "Thank you for coming, Auntie," she said quietly. Her voice was tired, not sharp, not distant, just tired. We sat there for a while without speaking. Finally, I said softly, "He works too much. He doesn't take care of himself." She nodded slowly. "I've told him so many times, but he doesn't listen." For the first time, I saw the worry in her eyes. Not coldness, not arrogance, just worry. She continued, "He stays up late, skips meals, takes on too much work. He says he's doing it for us, for the future." I sighed, my fingers tightening around my shawl. Sometimes love makes us forget the simple things, like rest or peace. She nodded again, eyes lowering. After a moment of silence, she said, "He doesn't like me to tell you things like this. He thinks you'll worry too much." I smiled gently. "That's what mothers do, dear. We worry, not because we can help, but because it's how we love." Something softened in her face then. The tension that had stood between us for months quietly dissolved in that small, rain-soaked waiting room. The next morning, he was better. When he woke up, he smiled weakly at both of us sitting there. "You two together? That's new," he joked faintly. I laughed softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I told her all your secrets," I said, smiling. He chuckled. For a few moments, it felt like everything was okay again. The distance, the silence, the pain, it all melted away under that fragile laughter. But deep inside, I knew something had changed forever. He wasn't the boy who once ran home after school shouting, "Ma, look what I made." He was a man now, a man burdened by responsibilities, pulled between two worlds, the one he came from and the one he built. Later that afternoon, the doctor came by and said he could be discharged soon. I went out to fill some forms while Ananya stayed with him. When I came back, I saw the two of them talking quietly. Their hands were clasped together, her eyes full of concern, his voice low and tender. I stood outside the curtain, watching. And in that small, fleeting moment, I realized something I'd refused to see all along. He didn't belong to me anymore, not the way he once did. His world had shifted, gently but completely. He wasn't just my son. He was her husband now. And love, as it grows, doesn't divide. It just changes form. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled, a smile of acceptance, of quiet understanding that motherhood is not about possession. It's about letting go. Before leaving, he held my hand. "Ma, I'm sorry," he said softly. "For what, beta?" "For not visiting more, for not calling. He sighed. "I didn't want to see you disappointed in me." I shook my head slowly. "There's nothing you could do to make me disappointed. I just wanted you to remember I'm still here." He squeezed my hand tighter. "I know, Ma. I promise I'll come soon, really soon." I smiled at him, but inside I knew promises made in moments like these often fade with time. Still, I wanted to believe him, because believing was easier than losing hope again. A few days later, they both came home for dinner. For the first time in years, the house felt full again. Laughter echoed, plates clinked, and the smell of warm food filled the air. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A fragile bridge between what was and what could be. That night, when they left, he hugged me tightly and said, "I'll come next week, Ma, I promise." And I believed him. Because sometimes belief is all a mother has left. But the weeks passed, then months, and he didn't come. At first, I told myself, he must be busy again. Then he'll call tomorrow. But tomorrow never came.
Ananya texted once or twice, just to check in, polite, brief, distant. But his voice, the one that once filled my home, was gone again. And that's when the quiet truth settled in my heart like the last drop of rain. He had promised he'd visit, but he never came back. That was the day I stopped waiting by the window. I still kept his room clean, still watered the plant he'd given me, still cooked his favorite dish once a month. But the waiting, the hoping, that part of me quietly slipped away. And in that stillness, I began to understand what motherhood truly meant. To love, even when love is one-sided. To hold on, even when you must let go. It's been 3 years now since that promise. 3 years since he said he'd come soon. And yet, the house remains quiet. At first, I used to mark the calendar, a red dot for each month that passed without a visit. After a while, I stopped. Time didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't something I counted. It was something I learned to live through. I've learned that silence has its own rhythm. It breathes. It listens. It holds memories gently, like a mother who knows her child has grown beyond her arms. These days, my mornings begin slowly. I still make 2 cups of tea, one for me and one for the memory of him. Sometimes, when I stir the sugar into mine, I look at the other cup, untouched, and smile. Not sadly, not bitterly, but with a kind of peace I didn't know I could have.
because love doesn't need presents to stay alive. It lives in small things. The cup he used to drink from, the plant he gave me that still grows by the window, the sound of his laughter echoing faintly in my memory. One afternoon, I received a small package in the mail. No name, no letter, just my address written neatly on top. Inside, I found a scarf, a blue one, the same shade I once knitted for him when he was little, and beneath it, a small note. Thought of you when I saw this. Take care, Ma. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. A mother knows her child's handwriting, no matter how many years have passed. I pressed the note to my chest, and for the first time in a long while, I let the tears fall. Not out of sadness, but from gratitude. Because even distance cannot erase love completely. That evening, I sat by the window again, but I didn't wait for his footsteps this time. Instead, I watched the children from the neighborhood play outside. Their laughter filled the air, and somehow it filled my heart too. I realized something then. Perhaps motherhood never truly ends. It just finds new places to rest. Sometimes it rests in the laughter of other children, sometimes in memories, and sometimes in the quiet acceptance that love is not always returned in the way you expect. That night, I opened the old box under his photo, the one filled with letters I had written but never sent. I took out the last one and began to read. The paper had yellowed a little. The ink had faded, but the words still felt warm. It said, "My dear son, if you ever feel lost, just close your eyes and come home in your heart. You don't need to knock. The door is always open." I smiled, folded it back gently, and whispered, "I think you already know." The next morning, I walked to the small park near my house. I hadn't been there in years. The air was cool, the ground damp from last night's rain. As I sat on a bench, an old woman next to me smiled. "You come here often?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but I used to come with my son when he was little." She nodded knowingly. "Children grow up, don't they? They fly so far we forget how small their wings once were." We both laughed softly. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That day, I realized something important. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with peace instead of pain. From then on, I began to live again, truly live. I started cooking for myself, planting new flowers in the garden, visiting neighbors, and even teaching the children nearby how to make sweets for festivals. When I laughed again for the first time in months, it startled me, but it felt right, because healing doesn't happen suddenly. It comes quietly, like the first light of morning after a long night of rain. Now, every evening, I light a small lamp beside his photo, not because I'm waiting for him, but because it reminds me of warmth, the kind that never truly goes out. Sometimes I speak to his picture. I tell him about my day, the new recipes I've tried, the children who visit and call me Auntie. I tell him that I'm proud of the man he's become, of the life he's living, and of the love that still connects us even in silence.
Last week, I dreamt of him. He was a little boy again, running through the house, laughing, calling, "Ma, look what I made." And I woke up smiling, because even in dreams, love remembers the way home. When I got out of bed, I saw the blue scarf he'd sent lying on the chair. I wrapped it around my shoulders, feeling its warmth, the same warmth I used to wrap around him when he was a child. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to the air. I forgive you, beta, for not coming back, because in my heart you never really left. Life has slowed down now. The days are gentler, the nights quieter, and the heart lighter. Sometimes neighbors ask if I feel lonely. I tell them no, I'm never alone. My memories keep me company. Because I've learned that love doesn't disappear with distance. It only changes its shape. From holding hands to holding memories. From hearing laughter to remembering its sound. I've stopped waiting for him to knock on my door. Instead, I've learned to open my heart for whoever needs a kind word, a smile, a meal, or a story. Maybe that's what motherhood becomes in the end. Not one child, but 100 small kindnesses we share with the world.
And sometimes, when I see a young man walking by with his mother, I smile, not out of envy, but out of gratitude that somewhere love still continues its quiet journey. Before I sleep each night, I whisper a prayer. May he always be safe. May he always find warmth wherever he is. And then I close my eyes with peace, knowing that love, once given, never truly ends. It lingers in the air, in the heart, in every small act of kindness we leave behind. Music, gentle piano fades out completely. Narrator, softly. When my son got married, I lost him for a while. But in losing him, I found something else. I found the strength to love without expecting, to give without holding back, and to forgive without needing to forget. Because sometimes that's what being a mother truly means.